Hello, everyone. My name is David Hamilton. I'm the founder and chairman of America's Future Series, and we are coming in to the home stretch of the program, as my good friend Scott Murray would like to say. We've got sort of a closeout, some very important messages, discussion for you guys to hear. I just want to stop for a moment and thank Bell for being our title sponsor. I want to thank Elbit for being a sponsor of this program. I want to thank Long Capture and all the other organizations that are involved in making this possible. I want to thank you, the viewers, our attendees of this program. Please contact us, email us, write us, let us know how we can improve things and how we can add speakers, panelists, the moderators to the program. We would love your input on that. I'd like to bring on one of the organizers, one of the hosts of today's event, our primary host, Mitch Johnson. Mitch, I want to thank him personally for all that he does. And I'm going to let him take it away here in a second. But Mitch, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, David. I've been here throughout the day, been radio silent since the late morning, but I have certainly enjoyed the program. We had some great panels and some great chats. Unfortunately, we're going to end on a strong note. We've got this last segment to kick off. Here shortly, I'll introduce a couple of special guests that are no strangers to the America's Future series. And these gentlemen are going to share some thoughts and ideas around this theme of conquering the valleys of death. And David, I've heard reference to the valleys of death at least a couple of times throughout the afternoon. We also heard this same theme last week during the National Security Pitch Day. So I'm looking forward to these gentlemen. Do we have Colonel Diller and Stephen Rodriuez? Are you guys online?
I am. Nate Diller is here.
Colonel, welcome, how are you, sir? Stephen, good to see you. Colonel Diller, it's great to have you back this week. I was fortunate enough to be able to observe or watch you and Secretary Murphy last week during the National Security Pitch Day. You may know that Secretary Murphy joined us again this morning and kind of kicked things off with the 2 4-stars. So thank you for returning this week. Stephen, good to see you. I don't think we've had a chance to meet yet, but thank you for your time and attendance today. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you guys have to say about this conquering the valleys of death. If I may, I'm going to offer some quick introductions here for the benefit of our audience, and then I'll turn it over to you. Colonel Nathan Diller, presently the director of AFWorks. Colonel Diller received his commission from the United States Air Force Academy in 2000 after simultaneously completing master's degrees at both Harvard and MIT. Colonel Diller attended Euro-NATO joint jet pilot training and flew F-16s for 2 combat Air Force assignments, ultimately becoming an instructor pilot. Colonel Diller served as an executive officer to the Air Force Scientific Advisory Board and as a Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, Service Chiefs Fellow. Again, great to have you on board, Colonel Diller. Next guest is Stephen Rodriuez, managing partner of One Defense and an investor with Refinery Ventures. Stephen's investments have generated a cumulative 26% internal rate of return across 14 investments to date. Those are sporty numbers, Stephen. Stephen is also a senior advisor at the Atlantic Council and a senior innovation advisor at the Naval Postgraduate School. Gentlemen, it's great to have you on board and closing out the day's festivities. Over to you.
Well, Mitch, thank you very much. And I'm really excited to have this discussion around the valleys of death. Normally, depending on what cultural reference you look at, the valleys of death usually implies imminent death. So it's interesting that so many people in startup and government landscapes use it as a thing like they're going across. And you know, of course, I scratch my head and I say, you realize when you use that reference, it usually implies you're probably not going to make it. So maybe you might want to wipe that out of your pitch to VCs. As Mitch mentioned in my bio, I threw in the investor performance numbers because increasingly there's a lot of interest, but and it's not just in the military, in the private sector as well, around venture capital, around investing, around startups, and of course, in many cases, around making money. I often joke that there are much faster and frankly easier ways of making money than going into venture or doing a startup. Often when people say, hey, how can I do what you did? I say, well, it involves a lot of poor life choices. So if you can avoid those, you'll generally be doing pretty well. And Colonel Diller, do you go by Nathan or Nate? What do you prefer?
Nate is good. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So you and I were a similar year group. I came out of the Corps of Cadets at Texas A&M, actually with Mark Welch's son, who was a cadet at, I think a year behind you maybe, at the academy or the school for boys who can't read good, as we prefer to call it down in Texas. Really great to have you on. And I think as we were sharing over email around questions that cover in a discussion like this, I think it's interesting to have someone like yourself who both has spent time at DARPA, the SCO or Strategic Capabilities Office for the Uninitiated, and of course now at AFWorks. So would love to get your perspective on the defense research and engineering ecosystem and how you saw the differences between an organization like DARPA, the SCO, and AFWorks, maybe as an opening teaser.
Yeah, sure. So thanks so much for the opportunity. This is a phenomenal this America Future series here. So appreciate the opportunity to be part of it. A bit hesitant to speak too much for DARPA and SCO and under the current, at a high level, what I will say, they've got different problem sets. And I think we in the Department of Defense do a good job of kind of identifying here are different approaches to kind of solving these different problems, right? Some of it is a time horizon. Some of it is, so right at a high level, DARPA looks to avoid strategic surprise and create strategic surprise, looking at DARPA hard problems. Their expectation of transition, I think they would tell you is intentionally not 100%, right? Something well less than 100%, because if you're not doing things with that level of risk, you're probably not solving a DARPA hard problem. And so you just see phenomenal technologies that have come from there that fundamentally have changed the way of life, not just in the United States, not just defense, but literally around the world. And that just comes from the brilliant folks that they have, the fact that they send them there, for a few years and then send them on their way. From Strategic Capabilities Office, this started with Will Roper as the first director there. I had the opportunity to work for him once we kind of relaunched AFWorks when we did Agility Prime as well. And they, at the very beginning, were focused on a very specific problem. And how do we do this quickly? I mean, in all these cases, speed, I think, is certainly a key from a scope perspective, looking to see how do we take some of our existing tools and repurpose those tools, right? So we're not going back and starting from scratch in many cases, but taking existing tools and repurposing those for rapid fielding. And again, both of those organizations took an approach that was across OSD, right? This joint approach. And then from AFWorks, our focus is again, speed, certainly looking in many ways, how do we bring in some of the non-traditional, the dual use capabilities? I think one of our distinctions is the fact that we are able as a service to leverage expertise across our airmen and guardian talent, right? Those hundreds or thousands of folks that are out there that wake up every morning and are passionate about going and finding new tech to solve these really challenging problems and using our Aft Ventures model to be able to create that open door. So at a high level, again, I'll defer a bit for others that are in those other organizations, but a huge privilege to get the opportunity to see the insights there and hopefully continuing to make distinctions in the way that we're solving these challenging national defense problems.
That's a great point. I've been saying for a while now that DoD uses its dollars to solve for technical risk. In other words, does this perform under certain conditions, or does it not perform under certain conditions? Whereas commercial investors use their dollars to address market risk. In other words, I'm going to use my money to buy up market risk. In other words, is there a buyer for this? In this case, this pen, or if you're in the Air Force, it's a projectile, is there a buyer for this, or is there not a buyer for this? So the reason why I mention that is when we think about values of death, that generally summarizes the dilemma that in the startup world companies have when they try to hit that sufficient level of enterprise customers to where they somewhat paradoxically shift from the jockey to the horse, so to speak. And it's usually around that Series B investment timeframe where it becomes less about the leadership brilliance of Colonel Diller, and it's more about, are you running VHS or Betamax? Quite frankly, in the government world, there's been a lot of ink spilled around how you climb up the TRL or technology readiness level chain and move towards a program element line or program of record. And this has been a big issue that Dr. Roper and I have talked a lot about. I know AFWERX is focused on, is moving beyond pushing more SBIRs out the door and actually getting those SBIRs to help translate into programs of record for compelling capabilities. I know, I had my friend Mike Madsen on just before this discussion, and I know that's a big focus of DIU's mission as well. So having said all this, why is the Valley of Death, why does it continue to be a problem? Because SBIRs are nothing new, right? I've written SBIRs and at the time when I had less commercial experience, scratched my head a lot when I looked at the I think it used to be Section 6, which talked about your commercialization strategy. And I said, what's that, right? Because I was a government contractor, right? And I had no idea about how do you actually turn this into a market risk question and not a technical risk question. So why is the Valley of Death so pervasive in DoD from your experience? And you have a unique experience, right? Your bio indicates that clearly. So why is this continue to be a pervasive issue? And how can AFWERX do a better job of helping bridge that gap?
Absolutely. Well, I think it's a pervasive issue because fundamentally, over the years, if we are doing defense acquisitions, right, and everyone wants to reform it, but when you think about what we are doing, it's a pretty grave task. We're taking the treasure of the taxpayer and turning it into warfighter capability, right, for the protection of the nation. And there's been failures in that history of misuse of funds or delivery of systems that did not meet that requirement. So every time there are failures in that, the response, oftentimes is, well, we need to create another check, another balance, to the point that right now you have all these checks and balances out there. And so navigating your way through those checks and balances has become extremely arduous. And it exists, though, right, to ensure that there's trust among industry, right, that there's fair competition, to ensure that the taxpayer dollars are being used well. Some of those checks and balances, one certainly is the budget, right? A 2-year budget cycle that the appropriators on Capitol Hill want to make sure that we are good stewards of that hard-earned taxpayer dollar that we're now responsible for. That 2-year budget cycle is a big challenge. What are we doing to try to leverage that? Well, the SBIR program is one tool. It's one of several other tools that we're looking to launch in AFWERX. We've used SBIR. Right, this from the Small Business Administration, 1982, 3-ish% cut of research, development, test, and evaluation funds, because it was a consistent funding line, right? And so if there were, I think we are finding, you can find our Aft Ventures paper online for those who are interested. I think what you'll find is so far this idea with the open topic, the approach that we're taking, it's a pretty good use of that consistent line of funding. We've been able to build a strategy around that funding piece. are there other consistent lines of funding that we would be able to build strategy around consistently that leave us some flexibility? Because at the pace that technology is changing, sometimes that 2-year budget cycle is rather challenging to predict in a way, given the uncertainty associated with technology. So certainly the budget piece is one. Contracting, so many opportunities to use some new authorities out there to accelerate contracting. I think we've had some success with that. Things like airworthiness, things like being able to get onto our networks. How do we accelerate those? And that's where you start to look at tools like digital engineering. If we could come into the 21st century with tools like that, my thought is, while this is a grave task, right, it is very important that we maintain this extraordinarily high level of trust. I think there are tools that maybe we haven't used as well as we could have in the Department of Defense that allow us not only to go faster, but do it actually with more discipline at an elevated level of trust for our airmen internally, for the investors and industry out there, and for the taxpayer.
So as a follow-up, Frank Kendall is just named the Secretary or the President Biden's nominee for Secretary of the Air Force, and my good friend Gina Ortiz-Jones has been nominated as the Undersecretary. That's how you know you're starting to get older, is when your friends start getting named in impressive positions and you're like, whoa, like that, you know, how is this possible? And then you look at everyone's bio and they're amazing. From your perspective, and you operate with quite a powerful position now between these two valleys of death, so to speak. How or what can the Department of the Air Force do to support the adoption of AFWERX successes, whether it's learning milestones, SIBR progress, things like that? A lot of the great things you're already doing. What would you like to see more of, or what would the message be that you'd like to share with Mr. Kendall or Ms. Jones?
Certainly. So one, congratulations. I guess first and foremost, I mean, look, we've had such fantastic leadership that has opened up opportunities both from the military side and from the civilian side, really with an openness to this, right, and a recognition, right. I think sobering that many have seen. You can read literature that talks what the risk is out there. So I think remaining clear-eyed about that risk, first and foremost, staying mission focused, being able to identify that risk. But there's so many opportunities where, you know, there's bureaucracy that exists there. There's those checks and balances. We don't want to completely set those things to the side. I think the thought is if we allow the horsepower of our airmen and guardian innovators to actually get on that problem, if we allow an openness to partnerships with industry and open up those opportunities for industry partnerships, we look at our international partners. There's a lot, you know, it's challenging doing that international work, but it's so important. When you look at dual use technology, there's so many more opportunities to build out that partnership with tech sharing, with mill-to-mill relationships that could be there. Fundamentally, it's allowing us to continue to expand those partnerships. And then as we do that, keeping trust, right? Doing the proper vetting internally so that when we are advertising what those opportunities are, that we are staying consistent and putting enough rigor in the approval processes so that we are certain that we can drive forward with confidence to keep that trust. And in those cases where we can't, right, things change, we're honest and we come out as soon as possible to say, here's what changed, here's why it changed. So again, I can't imagine a more exciting time to be in the Department of the Air Force. Unfortunately, it's one of the most challenging times when we look at the threat that's out there. But I think the mission focus that you see is going to create some phenomenal results.
So we've touched on this briefly before. I think one of the advantages the Department of Defense has in we won't take venture out of it and just say the technology investing ecosystem is its ability to invest meaningfully in hardware focused businesses. You know, the reason the dirty secret venture, you know, for the uninitiated is venture likes software because it's easily scalable. That's it. You know, there's probably other reasons. There's probably a million buzzwords, you know, like we're a Bitcoin or Dogecoin, not Doggy Coin, national security play or something. But at the end of the day, we invest in software because it easily scales. Hardware, not so much. And what's been interesting from a venture perspective is I've been inundated increasingly with, you mentioned Guardians earlier, and you have the planet behind you. So I might as well take advantage of the opportunity to highlight the fact that we see a ton of space companies, awesome space companies with really interesting, let's call it corporate performance in terms of revenue milestones. The problem is while they look great, especially compared to software companies, we're also very, very aware that they're not going to put a product in the market, and by market I mean low Earth or geosynchronous orbit, until 2024. So it's very difficult for most venture investors outside of institutions to meaningfully support those companies. Why is that a problem? The problem is by the time people in DoD or potential customers who are waiting for those guys or gals see them coming, they will never raise enough money to survive, and they'll have been long dead, right, by 2024, for instance. So from your perspective, more hardware specific startups that, what's it called? The National Security Innovation Capital Fund, I think to the tune of 14 million a year, I believe, is supposed to be focused on. How can AFWERX come alongside NSEC and other organizations to help foster hardware investments that, say, the conventional venture ecosystem, no matter how large or small the fund is, would normally shy away from?
Sure. So I mean, I think part of it comes to having a portfolio of investors, right? That broadens out, and we've been surprised, in our Agility Prime program, for example, kind of the broad spectrum of investors with different time horizons. And so I think that's important because depending on your investment thesis, obviously that makes a difference. And I guess there is still a lot of software that is a ton of software work that's out there, right? In some ways, we've touted ourselves as needing to become a software company. So I think that's part of it. I think that there's also some interesting things that have happened when we start to look at different approaches to manufacturing. That while hardware is not as scalable clearly as software, we're really maybe approaching an age when we start thinking about digital engineering, when we start thinking about some of the things that can be done with advanced manufacturing, where that threshold is not as hard. Now, certainly space has a different threshold, and that's how do I get on a launch timeline that actually, but you're seeing a lot of paradigms being broken there too. So I guess all of that to say that to some degree, I'm optimistic that that large distinction that we've had between software and hardware starts to get collapsed a bit by, maybe a future world where you have kind of more artisan engineering and it's done in a way that still meets kind of costs that you may not necessarily have to have the huge economies of scale that you might have had in the past, and you start to collapse as you start to see what digital engineering can do. You start to collapse that development cycle, you start to collapse the test cycle, you start to collapse that manufacturing cycle, so that between those, I think those barriers that have been there in the past start to be reduced. Are they going to go away? Probably not, but certainly with AFWERX, being able to partner with those, and in many cases, what we found is our value proposition, I think in some areas, is how do we bring that ability to help with certification, with airworthiness, with software development, with cybersecurity. And if we can accelerate those things, right, that all helps accelerate the time to market for that hardware.
Can you talk, you mentioned Agility Prime, for the audience, can you give us a primer on what it is and why it's important?
Sure. So, from a high level, just a tech perspective, out there, we kind of see this coalescence of three, others would say more, but one, large electrical power systems, right? Going into what we've described maybe as this third revolution in aerospace, right? From initial reciprocating engines to the jet age to electric, from, tube and fabric to eventually to aluminum and titanium, now to these advanced manufacturing composites. And there's a continuum, right? This isn't something that just happened instantly. The third then is with flight controls and automation, right? Cables back with the Wright brothers, eventually to hydraulic augmentation, and now to this idea of simplified vehicle operations, right? That with those together, we have this idea that we can do electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, carrying, potentially just hardware or 1 to maybe 8 passengers. The idea that that could be done in an urban environment, that could do things in a rural environment to help rural areas get medical care faster. So in DoD, that large picture is the tech for us. Why are we doing it? Well, because we see this as an emergent technology that could have profound impacts on the defense of the nation, certainly profound impacts on our defense and aerospace industry. Morgan Stanley talking to, $1.5 trillion market potentially over the next 10 to 20 years in this sector. So that strategic piece is key for us. Secondly, we see this as a path of improving those processes I just talked to, right? Us being able to provide different approaches to airworthiness, being able to use digital engineering differently, being able to use different contracting authorities, being able to find different ways of crossing that valley of death from a budgetary perspective. And then lastly, we feel that there is a strong need for this hardware, for a vertical takeoff and landing capability, but one that is all electric, right? That brings us into an electric age for aviation. This is the federal government's only passenger electric aircraft program that's out there today, that allows us to start to think about what it looks like to do autonomous logistics. So we feel like there's definitely a need for that, and we're doing it through risk reduction, through tech risk reduction, letting these companies use some of our testing locations, our testing expertise, regulatory risk reduction, doing airworthiness, and then the last, financial risk reduction. How do we be early adopters? The first, what we hope to be is a small part of then this blossoming market.
That's brilliant. And before I keep going, if you have questions, please submit them in the chat. We have, looks like 1 or 2 already, or tee them up, and I think it looks like the Q&A function works as well. So please start teeing up your questions as we keep going. So my organization, Refinery, has been the direct beneficiary of the last 2 Defense Venture Fellows cohorts. We've had an awesome experience with Dr. Pete Chushabay from Army Research Lab West, Colonel Joe Stallings, who I'm sure you know, in the previous cohort, and then now Major Donovan Hutchins and Lieutenant Commander Chris Knapp. So outstanding fellows. From my experience, I think once they arrive, and I think this is feedback you guys received too earlier in the cohorts, we've definitely had to be on top of our game in terms of what we want them to do, and ensure we immediately wrap our arms around them and get them involved. Because you only have them for 6 weeks and that time goes by fast. I realize you're still a little green around the ears at AFWERX proper, but what has been the feedback overall on that program, and what would you like to see more of from the hosts, whether they be VCs like us or tech companies?
What we'd like to see more, right? Getting them on the team. I mean, this goes very much to the core of how do we start to change the culture in our defense acquisitions. If we really believe what we say in our national defense strategy about commercial technologies having the potential to fundamentally change the nature of how we conduct warfare in the future, then we have to understand those technologies, but more importantly, we have to understand those technologists. We have to understand what it looks like to sit in the shoes, both from the venture capital side, from the tech startup side. And so, we see a key path in doing that, of changing our culture internally, is to do what we do in so many other cases, right? I mean, we have international programs that we've done forever because we know the importance of partnership with international companies. So putting them on your team so that they understand that culture, that they can bring that learning back to us, really, that's the biggest key. That helps us, immensely. We are working internally to make sure that we're now using that expertise as it's brought back in, and from an Air Force perspective, on our processes, how do we start to identify these individuals as key players, really in a bit of a different personnel paradigm. Just like the challenges of a 2-year budget cycle, the challenges of personnel movement. How do we create more flexibility? And this is one of those opportunities to go work with industry and have that learning quickly. So thanks to you and to all the other folks who have provided such a fantastic, the feedback is just phenomenal from the fellows that get to do that. And it's about that partnership. That's the only way. We have to mobilize that entire innovation ecosystem And this is a key part of that partnership for us.
So on a related note, recently we've seen a number of fledgling venture capital firms that have popped up promising a dual use technology focus. And it's great because I think what I've realized is it is definitely not a, what's the word, a zero-sum game. I think there are plenty of investable opportunities, and we have, I think with the relationship we've set up, frankly, a great customer with the U.S. military, and AFWorks plays a key role in that. What would you, from your position though, what would you encourage these VCs engaging in this ecosystem to consider when engaging with someone like AFWorks? Like what are kind of, I don't want to say pet peeves because that's a negative connotation, but what are some of the things that run through your head when someone like myself pops up and says, hey, we'd love to look at your companies. We're interested in national security. What are some of the things that run through your head where you say, oh man, if only you were smart on this, or only if you were better informed on this, this would make all of our jobs much easier with of course, the ultimate goal of supporting American national security.
Absolutely. So, in AFWorks, we have spent a significant amount of time on this open topic. We're still right in this, and that's where I'm going to spend most of the time. We are still doing kind of the traditional defense specific topics. We're putting in mechanisms right from the outset that we feel is key to driving across the valley of death. So recently, right, our Secretary of the Air Force made Director of AFWorks also the Chief Commercialization Officer. So this one of these ideas is the idea that commercialization takes on different roles. If you come in on a phase 1 SBIR, success doesn't necessarily mean going to a phase 2 SBIR, though we are providing that opportunity. In many cases, we'll take that opportunity. But there may be other ways of commercializing that technology that still get to our overall objective, which is partnership to bring in great technology into the Department of Defense. So it could be that the next step is going to another company and partnering with another company, and revenue is coming in that form. So I think about expectations a little bit, because in many cases, we don't have a great path for purchasing directly algorithms, or in some cases sensors, right? We purchase larger in-state items in some cases. We still want to find ways of energizing those other technologies that are out there. So one, I would say the expectation, thinking broadly about commercialization. I'll go more specifically then on kind of our 3 criteria. One of those is that commercialization. Do you have a path forward, and what role does DoD play? Are you expecting everything from DoD, or are there other non-DoD paths that you're looking at? So communicating that clearly, because we want to see a successful company. We want to see technology that's fantastic, right? We are in the Air Force Research Laboratory. We are building up a high bar to make sure that we're getting those exquisite technologies. So stating that very clearly. And then the last is the warfighting perspective. If you have a great idea, and this is the reason, right? We don't think that we're necessarily it's not a monopoly that we have on how to use technology in warfare. So bring those ideas to us. Those are the criteria. Those are the 3 criteria we evaluate on. Once you're in, then the other considerations are cybersecurity, supply chain security, and where is your capital coming from? We believe these are technologies that are not just important for the Department of Defense. They're technologies with commercial capability. And from that perspective, safety and security is going to be the highest concern. If you haven't protected your supply chain, if you have risky capital that you're reliant on, and if you're not thinking about cybersecurity from the outset, that certainly can present risk to us, and it's going to create some challenges, we think, to you and to the security of our nation.
You hit on a really important topic. Personally, I was involved in the early instantiations of the Trusted Capital program, originally called Trusted Capital Marketplace, or TCM. Even today, it's still a process. I think it's a fantastic idea. The big challenge, pivoting off what you just said, is the official DoD policy is promulgated as protect and promote, right? What technologies should we be protecting from foreign encroachment, and what technologies should we be promoting to ensure that company doesn't wither away and die? That's given us the much vaunted industrial-based resilience that everyone says that they want. Fine. The big challenge is, to date, it has still not been clear to me at all that we actually understand what we should be protecting and what we should be promoting. So the issue I had is, how can you have that? How can you affect that policy, right? Answering our civilian masters without understanding what technologies we should be trying to enshrine under that policy. So one kind of related question to that then is, as you guys see these either weaknesses or opportunities around protect and promote from an AFWERX, you're an Air Force officer, from an AFWERX lens, how can, has there been any thought, and if so, how can an organization like AFWERX more iteratively engage the venture capital community when you see a technology, you say, hey, like this pen, like we have to have this pen. If we don't support this pen in some form or fashion, it runs the risk of being, owned by the nefarious Swiss, and we can't possibly have that. So I jest, but I think you understand. There's a need for this, not a programmatic or certainly not a DoD top-down approach with industry. So how can agile organizations like AFWERX play a key role in terms of engaging the VC community? Because you guys do see the requirements and you give a clear demand signal with what companies are deemed fundable or not fundable.
Sure, right. So clearly a complex issue there, and limitations to the leverage that AFWERX can or does, kind of nudge those policies in different areas. What I will say is that, collaboratively with our other DoD counterparts, starting from a warfighter perspective, where do we see critical capabilities going forward, right? And this is where we go through our war game. But we also, part of the reason that we keep that topic is, to some degree, for us, that's a means of tech scouting, because there are likely areas of technology out there that are blind spots that may not show up in any policy area right now. And so that's where we really are looking to develop our understanding, and as you mentioned earlier, having those fellows, the venture fellows that are out there. It's what are the different mechanisms that we can put into place to identify those and to elevate those, so that if there's not clear policy on them, we're creating opportunities, I think, to have kind of this bottom up approach to identification, so that we're able to touch that directly. There's been some things that happened through the work that we did with COVID, from DPA, that allow, some opportunities to some degree that may, opportunities to potentially expand some of the work that started during COVID. I think it was a eye-opening for everyone to see the challenges to the supply chain, starting to dissect that supply chain. So you've got some fantastic organizations that really have started to be resourced in ways that weren't before. Again, because of a clarity that I think many have now on the risk that's out there. And the challenge of really understanding capital flows and where those come from will persist. I will say that I'm pleased in general that the direction and internal, some parts of the Air Force that are really providing some great leadership on that, but it's a coordination internal to DoD, but also an interagency coordination. And again, that partnership, the degree of functionality that this bureaucracy has through some of those partnerships, I think it's just been impressive to see kind of removal of stovepipes and collaboration. Are we where we need to be yet? Absolutely not. But I guess I'm pleased with the progress that's being made there.
So I asked this follow-up question, then it's pivoting off of a question from one of the audience members. A challenge with, one of the challenges with the DoD Valley of Death is that often the R&E or the research funders of the technology before the Valley of Death, right, to include, civil sponsors, are not the same funders of the that fully developed prototype once it's on the other side of the Valley of Death, right? Once it lands within, some joint program executive office. of a random aircraft that no one's ever heard of, like the F-35. So the challenge, and this is cast in a relief over the weekend. I don't know if you saw that video of now granted it was showboating in a production courtesy of the People's Republic of China and the Politburo. But I don't know if you saw the video of President Xi launching the assault ship, the destroyer, and the sub at the same time. That the Chinese are working on the technology side of the house, but they're also frankly working on numerical superiority. And in another life, I worked for Secretary Bob Gates when he replaced Secretary Rumsfeld at the height of the Iraq War. And he had a famous saying, apart from, I want to cancel all these programs, which is another sore subject among many people still in DoD. But one of the things he said was, no amount of technology can replace the fact that you need a carrier battle group in the Strait of Malacca and the Suez at the same time. And so he was highlighting this fact of physical numerical superiority and presence. That is, and look, it's not scandalous to say that anywhere. That has been an issue for us. Is we're what was the Norma Augustine quote, which you probably know, by 2035 or something, we'll have the F-35 will basically be used by 3 days by the Navy, 3 days by the Air Force, and like half a day on Sunday by the Marine Corps, something to that effect. So the question then, after that long-winded diatribe, is when you consider the Valley of Death, there's a speed to cross the Valley of Death, right? Speed from prototype to production. How could an organization like AFWERX play an enabling role in expediting not just the quality of that technology, whether it's venture backed or not, but also I think it ultimately comes down to the cost per unit of that technology. Is that even possible from where you guys sit in the research and engineering landscape?
Yeah, so this is a long discussion. Remember years ago when B2 was being debated on the floor of the House of Representatives, and you've got, here's one aircraft that can do one thing versus here's everything that we have to have today. And so what is that balance between exquisite and few, or potentially less exquisite and many, and a highly debated matter. I think there's a question that if you pick a strategy that looks at a hybrid of those, when I start to look at if I want to use something that is a lower cost, this really to some degrees maybe the greatest horsepower of AFWERX, because when I look at exquisite, it is very difficult to go mobilize the industrial base to create another F-35 manufacturing floor. It's very difficult to mobilize the industrial base to go quickly create another shipyard. If I start to look at dual use technologies, right, that are truly dual use, we get to a world of mobilization of the industrial base that hasn't been possible in many years. And so I think AFWERX actually plays a very, very central role in that, because we're, with Agility Prime, for example, to answer the beginning of that question, right from the outset, establishing that partnership across industry, across investor, across the acquisition program office, so that you're building a foundation of capabilities. Now, it doesn't mean that something that goes directly commercial doesn't need some type of military applique, but from a core perspective, from a platform perspective, when you start to look at the things like communication capabilities, like sensors, like compute, and in some cases even like platforms that we're seeing in Agility Prime, this now creates an ability to scale in ways that, and it doesn't mean that we don't get rid of those exquisite capabilities, because they provide profound opportunity to battle space. But certainly, if we're looking, at providing capacity in the world that we live in mostly, right, which is humanitarian support or disaster relief, if we can use dual use capabilities that can quickly scale in those areas, right, that buys us back potentially some top line budget that we now can push more in those exquisite capabilities that do require very defense specific investment. And so I think AFWERX actually is core to that type of strategy, that it's not just mobilization of the ideas that create right, building this entire team of our American and partner innovation ecosystems that are mobilized to help develop capabilities for defense and civil use through dual use. But then once those capabilities are developed, now you've got an industrial base, you've got an engine that really, I don't think we've explored to the degree that we could into the future.
Well, are you the second or third director of AFWERX now? Do you know?
The second director of AFWERX.
Okay, Dos. Over the life of the program, I've had the luxury of, and I think they're national treasures, of getting to know, I think he's pinned on now, Major Steve Lauver, an outstanding soldier, statesman, and knightly gentleman, as well as your team at Shift, Mike and Chris managing the Defense Ventures program. As the second director now, what is your kind of mission, and what do you want to see as kind of the final question? What is your mission, and what would you like to see happen under your tenure at AFWERX? That maybe, whether it's happened already or not, what's the kind of stamp you'd like to put on an organization that frankly acts as a huge demand signal for the venture capital ecosystem? It really, I think AFWERX has outsized punching power in the commercial ecosystem, which is a great opportunity, but frankly, it's also, without sounding cliche, a tremendous responsibility at the same time.
Sure. So three things. First and foremost, if you knew how small that team was, you would be very shocked. First thing is build a team, because we've just, I think, touched on the possibilities that are out there. And so I'm actually sitting, forgive the lack of green background, here at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base today, meeting with a full AFWERX team that is growing very quickly, but Steve Lauver is still there as one of the original founders, so that it stays true to its original purpose. The talent that we are bringing on this team is absolutely eye-watering. Building that team from capacity and capability is number one, because as you said, there's a high bar that this team has set in the past, and I think it's just the beginning. The second piece is delivering capability with speed and with discipline. We talked about that grave task of turning taxpayer treasure into warfighting capability. We've got to deliver, and we have to do it in a way that keeps trust across that full spectrum. Our airmen, investors, industry, interagency, the Congress, the taxpayer. That's number two. Right, and showing those new capabilities that are really out there, being able to create this new approach in Agility Prime, this new approach to advanced air mobility. We're going into space next. I expect to launch 4 Space Prime very soon. We've got 5 others that we think are very promising out there. The last piece of that, the last number 3 then, is scaling this, doing it in a way that, right, that's not a couple of experiments. It is actually fundamentally changing the way we are doing defense acquisitions, fundamentally changing the culture in how our airmen and our guardians think about solving future challenges, because it is a warfighting capability. It is an agility that we need to create in the system because of the speed that things are changing. So that's the path that we're on. Huge appreciation to the leadership that has kind of given us the autonomy, and huge thanks for the trust that others have given us. Our commitment is to maintain that trust and build on what so far has been, I think, some promising areas.
So one of the things I've learned is people will do a lot of things for you if you give them a meaningful mission, to include, officially due to government contracting, I can't say free work, but they will, the one thing they can't abide by is if you're wasting their time. So, given that you have a captive audience here, what's the best way? Is there, what's the web, I'm setting you up here, but is there a web address or an email that's good for interested folks to get engaged with the AFWERX community?
Absolutely. Go to afworks.af.mil, afwerx.af.mil. So that's kind of a launching point. There's an area there specifically for industry. If we've got government folks on, there's an area for government. As you start to look at some of our prime programs, direct you to some of the details on our Agility Prime program. We run our SBIRs 3 times a year. There are webinars that we hold weekly for folks that are interested in learning. We'll be doing Ask Me Anything specifically about software with Nick Shalon, our Chief Software Officer, on the 3rd of May. So a multitude of opportunities to engage with our team, and certainly that partnership is key going forward.
Well, great. Colonel Diller, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. This has been a great discussion, especially for, I'm shocked at all the people who stayed, frankly. I can say that now that we're done. This has been awesome. I'd love to see more of these types of discussions, and really glad that AFWorks and the Department of the Air Force have you as a leader to help us out.
Well, super. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Thanks for your partnership, and looking forward to continue to build on those partnerships. Appreciate the time.
Great. Mitch and David, back over to you guys.
All right. Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, Colonel Diller. Appreciate the time that you invested in us today. David, are you going to close things out with me? But we'll stand by for just a moment. But I'll say this, that personally, as well as an ambassador for Curtis Process Consulting, it's been an honor to be a contributor to today's activities. We had a fantastic lineup. As most everybody who's still with us knows, day 2's on tap tomorrow. We've got a great lineup. And I can see that David and Michelle have joined us, so I'll offer this parting comment. It would be very easy, David and Michelle, to say that the best is yet to come, but I got to say, our participants today, day 1, have set the bar really high. So tomorrow's folks have their work cut out for them. Over to you guys.
We would agree, sir. Thank you for your contributions. Thank you for being an ambassador of the America's Future series. Thank you to Stephen earlier and Colonel Diller. And all the speakers, etc. I just want to say a quick thank you to Bell and Elbit, and to Long Capture and EY for being our sponsors today. It would not be possible without their support and their involvement and their contributions, and they'll be with us tomorrow. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Michelle, my business partner. We've got some people to thank, and then we'll talk a little bit about what's going to happen tomorrow.
Yeah, I know Mitch, David already thanked you, but thank you so much for all your work and heart. You gave a lot of heart into this event. We really, really appreciate it. You're amazing, and just the relationships I know that you've built and how you've reached out to people and built this amazing. All these panels have been outstanding. Top leaders, really internationally have. So we just really appreciate it. I'm just going to go quickly down the list. Dave Maraska, fantastic panel that he put together. General Lee Levy, that was fabulous. You know, all the leaders that he brought. Alex Goldberg, the Honorable Secretary Patrick Murphy, Stephen Rodriuez, Arnell David, Paul Fico, Major General Bo Young, Dr. Bill Cohen, and then Ben McNally. He stepped in, and so they all did a tremendous job. We really appreciate it, and brought some really key strategies and ways to collaborate, ways to promote. You know, if you're a tech company, it was fabulous.
Well, it was great to be part of it, and again, today was great, and tomorrow may be even better. So looking forward to it.
Yes, we'll see. So thank you so much from the America's Future series, live at Murray Media Studios in Dallas. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning.